Our TV50 season of programmes continues throughout the week here on One. You can find all the details online at rte.ie/TV50. Now the life and times of John B Keane is told by the man himself.
I was born in July in the town of Listowel in County Kerry. I was the fourth member of a family of 5 boys and 4 girls. I was something of a problem to my parents in the early years because the power of speech escaped me until I was 3 years of age. When I started, however, I couldn't be stopped. And since that time, I have more than made up for my slow start. Both my parents are still alive and well. My mother was a small farmer's daughter from Ballydonoghue, a townland halfway between Listowel and Ballybunion. My father was a national teacher. I remember him vaguely during my first year at Listowel National School. I was 4 years of age then. The old school was undergoing repairs at the time, and all the classes occupied chalked off spaces on the second floor of the Carnegie Free Library. He taught 5th grade at the other end of the room from infants, where I was. Once or twice during the day he would cough. It was a very familiar cough, and I usually managed to catch his eye immediately afterwards. He used to wink at me without changing his expression, and things always bucked up a bit after that. Those early years at National School are hazy and dim, and the unpleasant incidents, the deliberate cruelties of boys and teachers are best forgotten. But there's one old teacher who still stands out very clearly in my memory. His name was Michael Keane, no relation. He was the principal teacher, a tall man with a very broad-brimmed hat and a fierce-looking moustache. When a small boy committed a crime of national importance, he was sent to Michael Keane for punishment. There was no corridor in the school, and it was the long walk through the classrooms that took the guts out of a person. There were the sympathetic glances from other small boys who had run the gauntlet before. Then there was the final, the awful knocking at his door. He had 2 slappers, one round and one flat. The round one was made of bamboo. The flat one was for major crimes, such as spilling inkwells or pinching neighbours. He smoked a turned-down pipe, and when a small boy entered, Michael Keane flexed his arms and brought a flat slapper to bear on the palm of a boy's hand. There was a resounding smack, very loud, but no pain. The flat slapper was merely a symbol. When the punishment was over, he generally gave a small boy a penny, and, if the boy was very small, a pull out of his pipe. When I was 8 years of age, when the summer holidays came, I was sent to stay with relatives in the Stax Mountains. I didn't want to go at the time, but complaints were arriving at home every day about such frightful offences as robbing orchards and tying pieces of thread to door knockers. I got a lift from a local creamery lorry, and with my brown suitcase between my legs, I set off into the unknown. For the next 5 years, I never missed the summer holidays in the Stax Mountains. Those were wonderful days, and it was there for the first time that I met characters who mattered and people who left a real impression. There were 3 matchmakers in the parish then. 6 people who had been accused of pishogues and evil eye work, and 20 of the most astonishing liars on the face of creation. The way of life was very simple. The church was several miles away, and going to mass on Sundays was an expedition. Money, the little that was made, came from the bogs. The turf was black and hard and had a good name in faraway places like Listowel and Tralee. At night, the time was passed by rambling from one house to another. A next-door neighbour might be 1 or 2 miles away. Wet nights were spent around the fire, and there were stories, usually ghost stories, so that when a fellow went to bed at night, he found it very hard to sleep. But in the house where I lived, there was an old man, a granduncle, who had more insight into the peculiarities of small boys' minds than any man I have ever known. By some uncanny instinct, he always knew when a small boy was afraid, and he would cough loudly 3 or 4 times to let me know that I wasn't alone in the world. He would talk to himself then. He had one great saying: "By the law, Terry, we'll never stick this out till morning." And if that didn't work, a fella could slip in beside him in the bed, quietly, and no word was spoken till morning, and no one was one bit the wiser either. After Stax Mountains and the end of my national school days, I enrolled in the local secondary school in Listowel, St. Michael's College, a branch of the diocesan seminary in Killarney. I spent a grand total of 6 years in St. Michael's, and I am still remembered there with some pride and affection by the other odd rebels who were occasionally imprisoned there. I was expelled 5 times for such heinous offences as smoking, speech-making, ballad writing and play acting. My teachers unfortunately disliked me to a man, with one exception. The brutality of one particular teacher is something which I will never quite forget. I still have scars and marks in my hands and legs from beatings received on countless occasions. These things again, they say, are best forgotten, but one particular beating remains very much in the mind. It was during an elocution class, when each boy was required to quote a few stanzas from some suitable poem. My turn came, and I made the disastrous mistake of quoting a poem which I had written myself. I was 18 years of age at the time. Here's the poem. It's called Church Street, the street where I was born in Listowel. I love the flags that pave the walk. I love the mud between, the funny figures drawn in chalk. I love to hear the sound of drays upon their round, of horses in their clock-like walk. I love to watch the corner people gawk, and hear what underlies their idle talk. I love to hear the music of the rain. I love the breaks between, when little boys begin to sail their paper galleons in the drain. Grey clouds sail west, and silver tips remain. The street, thank God, is bright and clean again. Here, within a single little street, is everything that is of pomp and blessed poverty made sweet, and all that is of love, of man and God above, of hope, despair, illusion and defeat. A golden mellow peace forever clings along the little street. There are so very many lasting things beyond the wall of strife in our beleaguered life. There are so very many lovely songs to sing, of God and his eternal love that rings, of simple people and of simple things. Who wrote that, he asked. I did, Father, I said. I knew that I had made an impression. I certainly had, because there followed the worst beating of all, and the ejection from the class. But that contributed more than anything else to my being a writer. That teacher has now departed the scene, and I realise now too that he was more to be pitied than blamed. However, in the end, at the second attempt, I left St. Michael's with an honours leaving certificate. The previous summer, together with a friend of mine, I had worked for 3 months with a farmer in County Wicklow. But this summer I decided to get a job nearer home. I was lucky, very lucky. I got a job as an assistant to a fowl buyer, and there followed 3 of the happiest months of my life. I learned how to kill ducks, geese, chickens, guinea fowl and turkeys with a mere flick of the fingers. The birds left this life without pain, and I became a member, fully fledged, of a highly skilled profession. I could tell you the weight of a tick of feathers to within a pound by just glancing at it, and I knew if an old rooster had kidney trouble by the look in his eyes. Some of my poems began to appear at this time in the dailies and local papers, so that I was a man of some substance and a chap to be reckoned with when I dressed up to go to the dances in Ballybunion on a Saturday night. Striped brown suits and bright brown shoes were the go at the time, and I had the best in both. Add to these a half bottle of hair oil with a gleaming white shirt and a red tie, and the ultimate result was overwhelming. Unfortunately, I reckon without the disease of snobbery. During the first Saturday night of my fowl buying period, the girl with whom I was dancing suddenly stopped and looked at me. "Hadn't you the fellow that buys the feathers?" she said. "That's right," I told her. "Bit cheeky you," she said, "to ask me to dance with you." And with that she left me standing there on the floor alone. It was a very difficult summer as far as romance was concerned. I found it increasingly difficult to get the local farmers' daughters to dance. When I danced with strange girls, they generally asked me what line of business I was in. "Oh, I'm in the bank," I said, "and my uncle's a parish priest." Believe me, that covered the multitude. That summer ended, and I was faced with choosing a career. My brother Eamon, 2 years before that, packed his traps without telling anybody, and the next thing we heard from him was that he was learning to be an actor in, of all places, the Abbey Theatre. Consequently, much consultation took place and many novenas were set for my sake. Eventually, I was apprenticed to a chemist in Listowel. My boss was the kindest of men, but after 5 years of bottle shaking, powder mixing, tablet counting and what curing, I was faced with the futility of my existence. I saw the future staring me in the face like a bottomless black pit. So I told him that I wanted to be a writer and that I was thinking of going to England. "It's as easy to write here as there," he said. But of course, I couldn't know that at the time. Around this time too in Listowel, Stan Kennelly and I started a newspaper. We called it the Listowel Leader. It was a stencil job. The first and only edition consisted of 960 copies, which were bought overnight, out of sheer curiosity, of course. Our circulation managers were 2 local girls, Kate Lynch and Marie Keane Stack, who later played opposite MacLeamore in the Gay Theatre. There was no second edition, for the good reason that we incurred the wrath of a few local councillors. In the editorial, a savage attack was made on the condition of the local town park. The line which gave offence was this: "You can send a message to a maiden aunt in New Jersey in a fraction of a second, but it can take years to send a simple truth to a 1/4 inch of urban council skull." They put the fear of God into us, and plans for expansion, luckily for us, ended prematurely. It was around this time too that I met Mary, now my wife, and it was perhaps the hopelessness of my position with regard to marriage that was responsible most of all for my leaving Ireland. So on the 6th of January 1952, I set out to make my fortune. It was my first trip to England, and when I boarded the train at Listowel, it seemed as if everybody was leaving. It was the same at every railway station along the way. Dunleary was the first. Dunleary was awful. It was a heartbreaking experience. Hundreds of tearful goodbyes to husbands gone back after Christmas. Chubby-faced boys and girls leaving home for the first time. Bewilderment written all over them. Hat-faced old stagers who never let on, but who felt it the worst of all, because they knew only too well what was before them. They had been there before. It was a viciously cold night with high seas. Conditions, to say the least, were shocking. I joined forces with a woman who was trying to look after 5 children. People were being violently sick everywhere. The younger men were drunk, but not violently so, tragically so. Don't to forget the hopelessness of having to leave home. Underneath it all was the heartbreaking, frightful anguish of separation. There's no use trying to describe it. You have to be part of it to feel it. The whole scene reminded me of the early Christian martyrs going out to face the terrors of the arena. But also, there was a spirit of fraternity, a kind of brotherhood, a communal feeling of tragedy which embraced us all. Everybody was helping somebody else. A few rough old diamonds took charge of the 5 children and looked after their every single one till morning came. It was just a formality for them. Of all the things I've ever felt or seen, nothing so moved that ever affected me as the sight of those men and women being torn away from home. In the bar and on deck, despite the cold, groups of men were singing. The singing was Duncan singing, but it was not without dignity. I remember one sang, "Come all ye true born Irishmen and listen to my song. I am a Bulbuck navvy and I don't know right from wrong. Of late I was transported, boys, from Maiden's holy shore. My case is sad, my crime is bad, for I was born poor. And if you're born poor, me boys, that is a woeful state. The judge will sit upon your crime, and this he will relate. I find the prisoner guilty, and the law I must lay down. Let this man be transported straight away to Camden Town. And then the awful refrain, oh Cricklewood, you stole my youth away, for I was young and innocent, and you were old and grey. And Cricklewood is old and grey, and so is Camden Town, and so is Lime Street Station in Liverpool, and so is Northampton. And it was in the town of Northampton that I was born. Murphy, a pal of my school days, a great Latin scholar, met me at 6 o'clock in the morning when the train pulled in. He took my bag and we walked. No buses running so early, 2 miles of streets until we came to the lane where he lodged. It was a drab, grey, dirty little street. On the windows of some of the houses there were placards which read, no dogs, no Negroes, no children, no Irish. And in italics, after this was written, this means you, Paddy. The digs were good, they were clean, and the food was plentiful enough. She was an Englishwoman. I remember one night, after the particularly bad thunderstorm, a man called Cody from Wexford asked her if there was holy water in the house. Henry, her husband, asked, holy what? Holy water, Cody said. I've had the tonic water and sulphur water, but I've never had the holy water, Henry said. That was England. The day after I arrived, I got a job in Booth the chemist at £6, 17 shillings and 6pence per week. I jacked it up after 1 week when Murphy decided he was going to join the Royal Navy. He talked me into going with him, told me I'd probably write a great novel when we got out. We set off for Portsmouth and got as far as Woking, where we drank our sorrows away. We were waylaid by 2 tally women, and the following morning we returned to Northampton again, sick and sore. The Royal Navy doesn't know about this, but it suffered a terrible defeat in that day. It lost the probable Drake and the possible Nelson, but however. In Northampton I got a job which paid well, brushing the streets in the early morning for the corporation. I stuck it for 3 months, during which time I wrote a short novel in the Patrick McGill style, which was determined to be by no fewer than 8 publishers. After that, I got a job at British Timken, a concern which produced all the bearings. I was employed in the hardening shop, where the furnaces were. The furnaces were of the rotary hat type, electrically run. The bearings were hardened and covered with a thin layer of nickel alloy in the furnaces. I became a furnace operator in no time. No Englishman, of course, would consider working in the hardening shop. The heat inside the furnaces was never less than 840 degrees, and often for special jobs, as high as 960 degrees. There were 4 other nationalities employed in this part of the factory: Poles, Czechs, Taffies, and Paddies. The money was good, but the conditions were shocking, and the heat almost unbearable. A man wore an overall and wooden clogs supplied by the firm, no more. I used to wear an old pair of football togs. I wrote another novel which was promptly returned by several publishers. Poems, stories, essays were being returned as fast as they were written. Then one day a man I knew well, we'll call him Joe the Pole, for short, dropped dead in front of the furnace where he worked. He was a countryman the same as myself, from near the town of Watwalk in the Vistula, about 30 miles from Warsaw. He died a long way from home. Shortly after that I left Northampton and worked for a while as a barman in Kettering and later in Leicester City. But the hours were too long and the money too small, so I came back to Northampton and returned to my old job. I wrote almost every night after that, except Saturday night. On Saturday night I generally got drunk, sometimes just merry, and other times bitterly drunk with frustration and loneliness, and I was lonely. One night I met a Canadian, a leftover from the First World War. He was an interesting man, clean and small and stocky. We met frequently after that. His name was George Pierce. One night in his cups he said to me, I'd give my heart and soul to be back in Toronto again, if it was only to die there. About that time too I was corresponding regularly with Mary. I had a little money, not a great deal, but a few £100. I was in love and I was learning how to write. I decided to go back to Ireland again. For weeks I bought the Irish papers in the local club. Then one morning I saw what I wanted. It was a vacancy for a chemist assistant in Doneraile in County Cork. £2.10 a week indoor, but it was home and I had plans. I got the job easily. There weren't many applicants for that kind of money. In fact, there weren't any other applicants. So after a 2-year sojourn as a book navvy, I found myself in Ireland again, one of the lucky ones. Neither Camden Town or Cricklewood stole my youth away, but they did steal other things, all right. In Doneraile, of course, I wrote another novel. It went its merry rounds and came back to me again, rejected. The old man for whom I worked in Doneraile was 93. The housekeeper was 82, and I was 25. He couldn't last. And 7 months later I got married to Mary. We bought a small pub and borrowed most of the money. But at last we had a home and we were in business. And we didn't do too badly, but we owed a good deal of money. And although we succeeded in paying most of it back, by degrees, it was slow, and it took a terrible toll on health, and it gave us both an inheritance of grim humours, grim and very peculiar humours, because the pub is not a home. It's a public house, where a man can sojourn most of the day if he wants to, and you have to hear his confession too, if the humour catches him. After 2 years, I began to write again. I'd given it up completely, altogether. I used to begin at 12 o'clock at night when all the customers had gone. I started with short stories. I worked until 4 and 5 o'clock every morning. I never missed a night. In the back kitchen of the pub, I had an old table, and there I'd sit with a 6-penny notebook. It was no good. All the stories kept coming back, and then a friend of mine suggested that I should write to a correspondence school. I almost did. But we discussed it one night in the back kitchen of the pub, and we reached certain conclusions. Why did these people not write stories themselves? It's the same as the Crossroads Dickens note said. They'll sell you books telling you how to win, but have they won themselves? Then one night after the particularly enjoyable sing-song, when my contribution was a mime of a youngster arriving in London for the first time, Dickens Notes made the following prophetic announcement. Johnny, he said, you should write a play. You're a shaggin' pantomime. I wrote several plays, but they all came back. Then one night, Mary and I went to see All Souls Night, a play in 3 acts by Joseph Tomilton. It was played by the Listowel drama group in Listowel. When we came home, I sent Mary to bed, and 10 bedtimes afterwards I had written 5. It took me 20 years to find out that I could write something marketable. Maybe 20 more years will pass before I can say to myself, you can write all right, you're okay, you're a writer. People will find it hard to understand this, but it isn't easy to become a writer. Nobody ever accepts a writer. He accepts himself. To be a writer, a real writer, you have to dream about it from the age of reason onwards. You have to hold this thing into yourself, and you have to listen to taunts and jibes far removed from clinical criticism. You have to suffer punches from behind, delivered by unknown assailants, and you have to read and listen to things about yourself which are far removed from the truth. You have to preach the gospel of charity to yourself, and you have to feel deeply for the hurt in other people. You have to hope that someday a budding, blossoming writer will come along and say, lads, listen to this a minute. Listen to what this fellow wrote. And hope that one ear out of a throng of people will later acknowledge and receipt the comments made by writing better stuff in the same vein himself. I've always wanted to be a writer, to be accepted as a writer at any level. I have lived with other writers, not with their beings, but with their books, with their poems, with their plays and with their journals. To me, writing matters because it's the noblest profession of all. It's the last of the free professions, and a man doesn't need matriculation to enter it. All he needs is heart, guts, courage, and never to be ashamed of himself or of his own people. A writer isn't a freak, a man to be watched or suspect. He's a human being with the finest of God's gifts at his disposal. He has the power to convey the great joys, great madnesses, and great hurts in others. I am a kind of writer, and my ambition is that people will say sometime, he was a kind of writer. He said certain things a different way from others. But nowadays, it's not enough to write. You must be a likeable fellow too. What I mean is that people must leave you saying, my God, isn't he a most unassuming fellow? It isn't enough to be a good writer anymore. You must be a nice fellow too. A writer cannot always be plausible because his head is crammed with ideas. A writer gets an idea every day of his life, and he is subject to the occasional obsession. And that's a terrible thing, the obsession. The truth is very hard to write. There are too many past liaisons when I personally face the moment of truth. Too many sins committed, and too many occasions of weakness which could contrive to hang me. All these contribute to blackmail the mind, to obscure the absolute truth for which every writer searches. But you can't blackmail the heart, because the heart has great moments of honesty and great moments of courage. I cannot believe that there is such a place as hell. I can't believe it. I cannot believe that Christ intended a hell for people with whom he walked and spoke and played all day long. Hell is here upon earth, not for those who pray and confess regularly, but for everybody else as well. Anyway, no God worth his oaths is going to be taken in by the last minute repentance of a man who spent his whole life upon it thinking that he was right and that everybody else was wrong. But where does all this leave me? Tomorrow night I'll be back in the pub, at home again in Listowel. And the day after I'll walk down along the field river to see what way the water is. I'll meet an old poacher I know and he'll say, "How'd the play's going, John?" I'd say, "Fine, fine." Then maybe he'll shake his head wisely and say, "Some people are not like more people at all." And I'd say, "You never spoke a true word." I'll walk further down the river where I wrote a poem shortly before I went to England for the first time, and remind myself that I must never take myself too seriously. Oh, my love, my first love, lie down here beside me. Oh, my love, my dear love, oh, sweet love, betide me. Lie still in my arms, do not moan, love, or tremble. The wild doves are sleeping high on the green bramble. All over Field River the shadows are falling, and deep in Shannon the vixen is calling. The sweet night is young, love, the night is forever, and shadows are falling all over Field River. I would fly like a bird with white wings in the air, or swim the salt water far off and clear. Come close, love, come closer, look deep in the pool, love. Was ever love making so tender or true, love? Oh, my love, my first love, the salmon are leaping. Lie still, my heart, my beloved is sleeping. The sweet night is young, love, tonight is forever, and shadows are falling all over Field River. The pub at home is a small one, with a back kitchen which takes the place of a lounge. A lunge, as they say in America. If you should happen to walk in there at night, you'll see 5 or 6 characters sitting in a half circle around the open fire. There's the Keane Roach in his wheelchair, sitting on the left-hand side of the hearth. He has been wheeled down the back way of the town by his 2 young daughters a few minutes before. He can barely move his hands, just enough to lift his drop of hot whiskey to his lips. He has been almost totally paralyzed now for 5 years. But if he hears about somebody who has the flu or a heavy cold, he'll say, "Well, thanks be to God we have our help, boys." Sometimes, too, we get tourists down there. Sometimes we get, honest to God, genuine people. And at other times we get smart italics who know the answers to everything, except the answer to what's wrong with themselves. Sometimes we get visits from fly-by-night reporters. Some of these, again, are genuine, while others go away and print a whole pack of lies about us. I remember this summer 2 English journalists from a certain English daily paper were in the bar. They spent an hour looking about them, saying nothing. But it was easy to see they were English, because they only bought 1 drink while they were there. While they were there, a tinker woman came in and asked to be served with a drink. She had a child in her arms, hidden under the shawl. So I asked her to go away. No comment of any kind from the 2 boys. That night I got a phone call from the Dublin office of this newspaper. "Is it true," the voice said, "that you no longer serve tramps and tinkers in your bar?" I said, "No, it's a lie, because I serve 2 of your people here today." There's nothing wrong with being a publican. St. Paul in his epistle to Corinthians said, "Take a little wine for thy stomach's sake, and for thy frequent infirmities." And how better can man live than by following the precepts of St. Paul? Of course, it seems to an eye certain sensitive people that a common publican should have the temerity to write plays. But sure, anybody can write a play if they want to do so badly enough. As the Keane Roach said the other night, I think I'll write a play myself and sell the rights to Hollywood. I'd be sitting back here then with big red plucks in me like a rooster and a huge white belly like a harvest frog. Or I'll be there like John B. with a pub of my own and plenty of porter and whiskey for the rest of my life. Good luck.